right, folks. Hello. Welcome to tonight's Skill Up series. My name is Emily Spranger. I'm an academic trainer in the Graduate Studies Support Center, formerly known as the Center for Teaching and Learning. And I couldn't be more thrilled to be able to present this session from two of our wonderful faculty members in the Sanford College of Education, Dr. Janet Boberg and Dr. Linda Bloomberg. Tonight's session is focused on qualitative research designs, and I'm just going to touch base on a few housekeeping items, and then I will turn this over to our presenters. So as a reminder, we are recording our webinar, and we will put it in our Graduate Studies Support Center webinar section. And I will send a copy of this presentation to all of our registrants for this event. So keep in mind that is coming your way. I do have a couple of representatives here with me from the Graduate Studies Support Center who will be assisting in the chat. So if you do have questions, we are going to want you to pop them in the chat. But that being said, tonight's session is really going to be focused on an informational session from Dr. Bloomberg and Dr. Boberg. So if you have specific questions about your own research design, please make sure that you are pointing that towards your faculty members or your committee members from your dissertation. Okay, that's it. Without any further ado, Dr. Bloomberg, I would like to turn this over to you.
Thanks so much, Emily. As always, I'm really happy to present on the part of the Graduate Studies Support Center, and I'm really thrilled to be presenting here today with my colleague, Dr. Janet Boberg. We have what we think is a very informative two-part webinar series. Today is the first part. The second part will be next week at the same time on the 22nd. I just also want to say how much I appreciate you, Emily, and the Graduate Studies Support Center for always hosting wonderful webinars for our students and faculty to really skill up. And I love the Skill Up series, and this really fits very much into that. And I also just want to make clear that sometimes in my presentations, I do stop periodically for questions, but we're not going to be doing that today because we have such a large amount of material to get through with all the different designs. We're going to be talking about two specific ones today, which we'll tell you about in a little while. But that said, we're only going to stop at the end for questions, and we're very happy to take questions, as Emily said, not directly related to anybody's specific study, but more generally about research designs in qualitative research. So that said, I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Dr. Boberg, who's going to start off, and I hope you all enjoy this presentation.
Good evening, everybody, or for some of you, I'm sure it's afternoon, or maybe somebody overseas, it's in the morning. I'm Dr. Janet Boberg, and what I'd like everybody to do right now is to kind of put on your qualitative research hat, because that's really what we're going to get in depth talking about today and some specific designs. So with that being said, I want to talk about some learning objectives. Next slide, please. So for this presentation, and actually for next week's presentation, we're going to try to make the qualitative research designs understandable and easy to apply. And we're going to do that by looking at a brief overview of what qualitative research is. We're going to look at some very key and important features of the qualitative research designs. We're going to talk a little bit about the data collection methods of the different research designs, the analysis methods, and then how to present the findings of your research. And we're also going to provide some practical applications by way of good dissertation examples for each of the designs that we'll be talking about. We're also going to look at some specific terminology that's associated with each design and clarify the implications of choosing the specific research design based on your study's problem, purpose, and research questions.
Thank you. I'm going to start off by looking a little bit more closely at qualitative research and the key principles that really undergird this methodology. As many of you who are doing qualitative studies know, that this is a method that, or methodology that cuts across many different disciplines and subject matter areas. It is well suited to promoting a deep understanding of a social setting or a context or an experience as viewed from the research participants themselves. The emphasis is on exploration, discovery, and description, rather than being a problem-solving approach. The research questions are typically open-ended so that we do not get yes/no questions, but rather we get in-depth, rich responses in the participants' own words. Sample selection is purposeful rather than random. And triangulation addresses trustworthiness criteria by making use of multiple data sources and methods of data collection. We're going to be talking more about this further on. The goal of qualitative research is really not to produce any truths that can be generalized, but rather for readers to decide for themselves whether a study's findings can and do apply to their own settings and contexts. And this is the concept of transferability, which is key to qualitative research. Something else that's really important to remember is that the researcher should always remain transparent about their positionality, because positionality really affects or impacts everything that the researcher does from the very beginning of setting up the study right until the final stages of writing up the findings and providing some interpretations, conclusions, and recommendations. Let's move now a little bit more closely into the actual qualitative research designs themselves. Remember, research design is a core component of any research study, whether it's qualitative or quantitative. And so selecting an appropriate design is critical to the study's rigor and quality. There are so many differences in how a qualitative study can be designed and conducted. And research designs are typically derived from research methods, as in the case of case study, or from a philosophy, as in the case of phenomenology, or even from theory, as in grounded theory. And each of the qualitative research designs, which are sometimes referred to in the literature as traditions or genres, encompass very, very specific ways of identifying and addressing a researchable problem, the ways that the study is set up, and the ways that data is collected, analyzed, and presented. So that said, I want to just make very clear also that developing a sound and feasible research design is like constructing a strong foundation for a building. And if one thinks about a building, every single building, even though some buildings may be very alike, are really unique in their footprint and in the way that they finally turn out. There are very specific or unique differences even among the most similar buildings. And so research designs are really specific to a particular study. And that is why we're going to be showing you as we move through today's presentation, and even more so in next week's presentation, we're going to be talking about how important it is to really select a specific rather than a generic approach. There is no generic approach to research designs. In effect, there really is not. A research design is something that's been really crafted by the qualitative methodologists, the really great thinkers in the world like Lincoln and Guber and Norman Denson, people that have really studied this for many, many years. And so there are some really important research designs in the literature that are considered the major research designs. And we're going to be talking about 2 of them today and 3 of them next week. So the goal is really to ensure that your research design addresses all of the following aligned components upon which your specific study is built. And this means your problem statement, your purpose statement, and your own study's research questions, which are always unique. Remember, a researcher will need to carefully consider whether methods of data collection and analysis will apply appropriately to their selected design, because each selected design has its own way of collecting data and collecting data and analyzing data. And that is why there is no such thing as generic. It is very, very specific. I just want to move something away. And so my final comment on this slide is that a viable and appropriate research design is essential, indeed critical, so that the study is methodologically congruent. Let's take a look for another moment at the key research designs in qualitative research that are mentioned in the literature. And these are case study, phenomenology, ethnography, narrative inquiry, and grounded theory. So today, in part 1 of this webinar series, we're going to be looking at case study and phenomenology in great detail. Next week, we're going to be looking at the other 3, ethnography, narrative inquiry, and grounded theory. So selecting a qualitative research design, how does one go about selecting this design? Remember, the design is really the one that is most appropriately suited to your study's research problem, research purpose, and research questions. You cannot just assume that a particular design will fit your study without really considering your problem, purpose, and questions. Also, it is not ever recommended that you change or modify your problem to fit a design just because you like a particular design. The research design essentially follows from the problem, purpose, and questions, and not the other way around. So, how do you justify your choice of research design once you've made that choice? Remember, in planning and conducting a qualitative study, you'll need to choose an appropriate and suitable research design, because that is one of the key features that will really make your study a feasible study. So you may be asking yourself, well, what is the best place to start? Should I base my design on a philosophy or a paradigm? Should I choose a design that is most familiar or appealing to me, or one that I find most intriguing? Should I choose a design that I've heard other students or colleagues are using? Should I choose a design that may be easiest to apply? And the most important question is, how will I justify my choice of design? And I think that what Dr. Boberg and I have really honed in on in developing this webinar series is just that. How do you justify a choice of research design so that it is appropriate and methodologically congruent for the study that you are intending to conduct? And I've just put on this slide a diagram that I've included in the 5th edition of my book, Completing Your Qualitative Dissertation, A Roadmap from Beginning to End. This particular figure, which is figure 6.3 in chapter 6, is a tool that one can use to think about how to set up your study and then choose an appropriate design based on your problem, purpose, and research questions. Remember, all of the elements, the problem, purpose, and research questions must align with your chosen research design. It's just really critical that it does. I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Boberg, who's going to present the next section. Dr. Boberg?
Oh,
Yep. When we think about research and what we want to study, we need to think about where can those research ideas come from. They can come from events, they can come from the literature, something that you've read, maybe experiences in your job, ideas, observations. Those research ideas can come from anywhere. So I would like for you to take a look at the next 2 pictures on the next slide and just take a look. I mean, you can see through the pictures that they are of a fire. But I want to give you a little bit of background on this fire. Fires are not supposed to happen, but when they do, when people die, they can affect an entire community. Never was this more apparent than on December 1st, 1958, when Chicago and the nation experienced one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in United States history. On that day, a fire enveloped the half-century-old Our Lady of the Angels parochial school on Chicago's west side, leaving 92 students and 3 nuns dead. Subsequent investigation over several years actually led to a 5th grade student who was at that school, attending that school on the day of the Our Lady of the Angels school fire, went downstairs into the basement, threw 3 matches into a rubbish bin, watched the fire grow, went back up, and sat in his classroom. So thinking about that information, the fire at Our Lady of the Angels school and its subsequent investigation prompted the following questions. Do most students who set school fires do so because they dislike school, the teacher, and/or administrative staff? Are most students who set school fires troubled students with poor attendance records, low grades, and poor school behavior? How frequently do school fires occur in the United States? What does the current research say about the motivation of school fire setters? So looking at this, what research design could you choose and why? So just think about that after the story that I have shared. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
So defining the research purpose and research questions that I just read will help bring clarity in choosing the appropriate design. Next slide, please. So what research design was chosen for this research study? The fire at Our Lady of the Angels School was and still is the most horrific school fire in the history of the United States. What even makes it more tragic is the fact that the fire was actually set by a troubled 5th grade student who reported that the reason for the fire was because he hated his teachers and principal. Further investigation by the police and polygraph examiner revealed that the boy believed that if he burned down the school, he would not have to attend school anymore. So the purpose of this qualitative exploratory case study was to gain access to and insight from students who set school fires to understand the motivation for school fires and to determine if school fire setters experienced academic, school behavior, or mental health problems prior to their fire setting incident. And the hope was that the information gained from this study could then be used by the fire service and school administrators to develop a plan to identify students who may have the potential to set a school fire before they actually set that school fire.
So leading in from what Dr. Boberg just described as a case study, I'm going to be taking the section on case study to more fully explore what is case study design, how is it used, and how does it play out in a qualitative study. As we're going to be doing today with the 2 research designs that we're presenting, case study being one of them, we're going to look at an overview of the actual design. Then we're going to go into more specific ideas regarding data collection and data analysis and data presentation. And then we're then going to be presenting, as Dr. Boberg said in the beginning, some excellent studies that have used a particular design, in this case study. So let's start with an overview of this research design, which is a really very common research design that is used a lot in dissertation research and for very specific reasons. An in-depth exploration is what case study is all about, from the multiple perspectives of the richness and complexity of a bounded social phenomenon. The whole idea of boundaries and being bounded is very critical to understanding what case study design is all about. A bounded system can be a social unit such as a program, an event, an institution, an organization, or even an entire community. Case study is selected for purposes of understanding a process rather than outcomes, and the goal is discovery rather than confirmation. Yin, one of the most important writers of case study literature, categorizes case studies as either exploratory or descriptive. And he describes exploratory case studies as those that are used to explore situations in which a phenomenon has no clear outcomes. And descriptive case study is used to describe a phenomenon and the real-life context in which it occurred. Robert Stake, one of the other key writers of qualitative case study literature, identifies case studies as either intrinsic or instrumental, and he also says that a primary distinction in designing case study research is between single and multiple case study designs. And he describes it like this. He says that an intrinsic case study is used when the intent is to better understand the unique or specific case. Instrumental case studies are used to accomplish something other than understanding a particular situation, including gaining deeper insight into a specific issue or concern. And multiple case study is used for purposes of cross-case analysis when the researcher seeks to compare, contrast, and synthesize perspectives regarding the same phenomenon from different angles. Let's look at the methods of data collection that are very specific to case study. Remember, as a start, it's really important to always remember that research must draw on multiple methods of data collection, which is for the purposes of achieving triangulation. And this is really critical in case study research. So doing just one method is not sufficient. Multiple, at least 2 methods is what is required. And if there are even more, that would bring greater clarity and greater triangulation to the study. Methods of data collection can include individual interviews, observation, focus groups, critical incident questionnaires, document and imagery review, and open-ended surveys. Remember, as I said in the beginning, surveys, if used in qualitative research, are not closed-ended because we do not want a yes or no response. We rather are seeking a much more nuanced and rich response that is provided in the voice and the words of the participants themselves. Triangulation is critical in attempting to obtain an in-depth understanding of the case, and the way that the researcher triangulates and the extent to which the researcher triangulates does contribute significantly to the credibility of the study. Let's move now to data analysis methods. And again, data analysis is very specific to each research design. And so the kind of data analysis that you conduct in qualitative case study would be very different to what you do in phenomenology and in the other research designs as well, such as narrative inquiry, ethnography, and grounded theory. Each of these designs has its very own specific and analytic protocols. In qualitative research in general, if one has ever done any analysis or if you've read about it, you will know that qualitative data analysis is a very messy process. It goes back and forth. It's not a linear, neat process. And as such, it can be a source of frustration and confusion. But that is something that as qualitative researchers, it is part of the process. Analytic methods in case study design include thematic analysis, content analysis, text or discourse analysis, and also visual analysis. Visual analysis takes place if the research is using artifacts such as imagery, visuals, photographs, pictures, social media materials, etc. The goal overall of analysis is to develop codes, categories, and themes from the raw data. In addition to thick, rich description of the data and of the findings, the researcher's own interpretations, conclusions, and recommendations, and their personal reflection on the study contribute to the overall understanding of the case. The researcher's role in analyzing data is specifically to determine what the findings mean. In other words, to ask the question, what is the real meaning of these findings? What do the findings themselves say and mean? And so having conducted data collection and then data analysis, how are the findings presented in a case study? Remember, the findings must illustrate an organized response to each of the study's research questions as a start. So that is something that is essential. The findings also include a detailed analysis of the themes that are developed. The findings are reported in a narrative manner to include extensive samples of verbatim quotations from the research participants themselves. And as in all qualitative research, tables, figures, charts, matrices, and other imagery always serve as visual graphics to add to your narrative interpretation and description, and is a really good way to organize and portray information. So always remember that in qualitative research, that is always appreciated when you have got the tables, charts, and matrices to show your reader how you did things, how you analyzed, and how you're presenting your data in visual format. I just want to add one thing as well, which is not on the slide, and that is in case study, we can do a manual analysis, and we can also do analysis using software programs, and there are quite a few of them out there. I know that National University has In Vivo, which is provided free to students. But remember, the software can only do as much as a computer program can do. It's not human. So the software will analyze the data, it will code the data, it will even give you categories or even maybe themes. But the interpretation and the conclusions and the description can only come from the human as researcher. And so that is always a part of the study and part of the analysis that no amount of software can do for you. So that is something to also bear in mind as you consider data analysis in qualitative research generally. And then over here, as we'll do with all the different designs that we're going to be discussing today and next week, Dr. Boberg and I have gone into the literature and sought out what we think are relatively good examples of dissertations that have used the particular research design that we're talking about, in this case study. So all of these designs over here, including Dr. Boberg and my own dissertations, are available on ProQuest to take a look at. And the other two dissertations, one of Janelli Garza, who was a previous student of mine at North Central University, as well as a student of mine, Cheryl Sidlow, who was also a student at North Central, who did outstanding dissertations with case study design. All of these are available. If you click on the links here, there are live links, and you'll be able to go in and take a look at these studies And we really urge you to do so with the lens of looking at what are these studies' problem, purpose, and research questions, and then how have they selected case study to align with those key elements of the design. So if you do take the time to take a look at these studies, bear in mind that this choice and the justification for the use of case study design is what you're really going to be looking for to try and understand how case study fits with these particular studies. So what I'm going to be doing now is handing over to Dr. Boberg, who's going to move us into the next research design for today's webinar.
So we're back to the pictures. Take a good look at these pictures, and I want to read you some passages. In 2015, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter lifted the ban on females serving in combat arms units in the military. With this historic move toward gender equality occurring recently, the research capturing the firsthand experiences of females who were integrated into combat arms units is extremely limited. In a 5-year status update report, the Army accessed 1,055 women into combat arms units, while 653 women had successfully completed training and were actually assigned to a combat arms military occupation specialty. So the problem that was addressed in this study was that there was limited research that has captured the firsthand experiences of female officers and non-commissioned officers serving in combat arms units since the ban excluding them from the specific job was lifted. As of 2018, there have been more than 600 women in the Army who have transferred their military occupation specialty to combat arms branch or who have been recruited into the branch. Next slide, please. So what research design could you choose based on that brief amount of information, and why? Again, just think about this and answer this to yourself. But what this student did, and I'll read her purpose statement, is made this study into a phenomenological research study. So the purpose of this qualitative phenomenological study was to explore the experiences of female officers and non-commissioned officers who were chosen to be amongst the first leaders to serve in combat arms units following the recent initiative of gender integration in combat arms units. As the first female commander in a combat arms unit in the Guam National Guard, the phenomenological design is best suited to understand the complex personal experiences of full gender integration across all branches in the military due to the intricate use of both descriptions and interpretations of the phenomenon being investigated. This dissertation was written by Dr. Leona Campbell from North Central University. She graduated in 2021, and the title of her dissertation was A Phenomenological Study of Female Army Leaders in Combat Arms Units. So the next part of the presentation for tonight is we're going to be talking about the phenomenological research design in qualitative research. Next slide, please. Okay. So phenomenology is a philosophy. Actually, Husserl identified this in the 1850s, and it can be used as a foundation for qualitative research as well as a research design in and of itself. But understanding the philosophies is really important and as important as the research techniques that we look at. With phenomenology, the goal is to really look at the meaning of the lived experiences of others to identify the core essence of that human experience or phenomenon as they, the participants in our study, describe it. So think about this. We could do a phenomenological study of the individuals who were in the footprint of the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001. As they look up and they see the planes crash into the World Trade Center, if we were able to take, say, 12 to 15 of those participants that witnessed that same event, that lived experience. And then we did very in-depth interviews with each of them. We will be getting the core essence of their human experience. And they all may be just a little bit different, yet they were there, and they all were there at the same time with the same lived experience, but how they present that to us may be very, very different. So Dr. Bloomberg so eloquently talked about case studies. So while case studies focus on exploring the case or the event to get a better understanding of the case itself, phenomenology, on the other hand, focuses on studying that individual's lived experience to better understand the essence of their experience. So we're really letting them, in a way, tell their story. The focus is not on the participants themselves or the world they inhabit, but rather on the meaning or essence of the interrelationship between the two, the participants and the world they inhabit, based on that lived experience. So this, I think, kind of gives you a little idea of the difference between what a case study is and what we look at, and what a phenomenological study is and how we look at that. When we talk about phenomenology, we also need to talk about something called bracketing, or a bracketing interview. And a bracketing interview is where the researcher is able to bracket their own experiences and beliefs to understand participants' experience. And bracketing, or another term for it is epoch, it refers to the researcher suspending their presuppositions, biases, assumptions, and judgments, and focus solely on describing each of the participants' experience and then analyzing the phenomena. So a bracketing interview, if you could go back, please.
No, sorry.
That's okay. So a bracketing interview can be done by your dissertation chair, your SME, or both. And what that bracketing interview is they begin to ask you questions about your perceptions of your research topic, your preconceived ideas, any biases, any assumptions that you already have. So it's very transparent and it's out there, because you have to report not from your perspective what your participants are saying with a phenomenology, but you're reporting their experience. So the challenge of this epoch, or suspending the suppositions, is to be transparent to ourselves, to allow whatever is before us in conscious to disclose itself.
Right.
So that we can see that through the eyes of the participants. And bracketing also allows the researcher to keep an open mind and listen in a very receptive manner to the participants' description of their lived experience or their studied phenomena. So it's putting aside your ideas, your assumptions, what you think about the topic, and letting the individuals share their experience with that topic. Next, yeah, thank you. So when we look at the methods of data collection, we have a small number of individuals are studied, and with most qualitative studies, we do have a smaller sample size than definitely with a quantitative or mixed method study. But we do what's called extensive and prolonged engagement in order to develop patterns and relationships of meaning. So we're going to get in-depth interviews. Not uncommon to have one transcript of a phenomenological interview be 27 to 30 pages in length just for the transcript, because it's not only a description, but it's also a process in which you as the researcher has to interpret the meaning of the participants' lived experience that is derived from that very, very in-depth semi-structured interview. And then it's very common also with a phenomenological study that we do follow-up interviews, because we're going to have some questions that arise, and we want that gap in information with those questions that we have to be filled. The interview questions are limited to questions about their feelings regarding their lived experience, but we're not going to ask them an opinion of what happened. We want them to tell us from their perspective how they lived that experience without opinions. We can also use focus groups with phenomenology, and that helps us achieve the triangulation for our trustworthiness. And your researcher also will use, with the phenomenological study, journaling and field notes. Now we need to look
I'm so
at—
sorry.
That's okay. Now we need to look at some methods of data analysis. And the term data analysis is not completely in line with phenomenology like we think of it with the case study, because when we talk about data analysis, it means to break into parts, whereas the goal is for a phenomenology to understand the phenomenon as a whole. So the researcher will look at the essence of the experience from the transcripts, from the participants, and look for significant statements, meaning units, and core themes, and describing what the individuals have experienced within the context of their lived experience. And there's three approaches that a researcher can use when they're analyzing phenomenological data. One is a holistic approach where the researcher captures the meaning of the entire text, of the entire interview. A second is a selective approach, which highlights certain phrases or statements that appear especially revealing about that individual participant's experience. Or the third is a detailed approach that examines every sentence, line by line by line. And the researcher here will engage in what we call imaginative variation to reflect on and offer possible meanings and perspectives related to the phenomenon, that person, that participant's lived experience. When we present findings from a phenomenological study, we focus on the development of the essence of the participant's lived experience rather than explanations or analysis of the experience. So if I'm going to be interviewing the participants who were in the footprint of the Twin Towers on September 11th, 2001, I'm not going to analyze their experience. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share how they perceived and experienced being in the footprint of the Twin Towers when the planes crashed and the towers fell. So the purpose of presenting the finding is to reduce this individual experience by describing what all participants have in common as they experience a phenomenon, because it's going to be the phenomenon they have in common, that lived experience, and we call that a process of reduction. But so we're going to look for the commonalities that all of the participants have, but we're also going to look for things that are diverge, that maybe each participant discusses about their lived experience that the other participants don't discuss. So the researcher then will write a composite description that presents the essence of the phenomenon of that lived experience. And this can include a structural description, how things occurred, that is the context, and a textural description of the lived experience, what the participants experienced themselves. Here are two examples of dissertations where the phenomenological research design was used. One was Taylor Schumann from Western Michigan University, and the other was Leona Campbell from North Central University, of whom I read the transcript from her dissertation from her particular study. Both are excellent examples of phenomenological research studies.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boberg. And again, I really urge, if you're interested in looking at these studies, to look at it from with the lens of how does the research design phenomenology apply to these particular studies in terms of their problem, purpose, and research questions, And looking at that very closely and trying to establish the alignment there for yourself will help you gain a deeper understanding of how a research design appropriately fits with a problem, and how a problem should, as I said earlier, not ever be changed to fit the design, but rather the other way around. How does the design follow the problem, purpose, and research questions? So having heard about case study design and phenomenology as a qualitative research design, you may be asking in your mind some of these kind of questions. Which design does my research problem fit best with? What is the purpose of my research? What research questions am I wanting my study to answer? And is the chosen design that I'm thinking about or considering a suitable match with my research skills and experience as a student researcher? So those are some of the key questions that you should be asking yourself as you are setting up a study and trying to select the most appropriate research design. The material for this presentation and the one next week are drawn largely from my book, the 5th edition of my book, which is currently out. It's a 2023 edition. And Dr. Boberg and I have also drawn very heavily on the key seminal writing that authors have written about on these two research designs. Miriam, Yin, and Stake for case study design, Van Manen and Mistakis for phenomenology. So here are some excellent seminal authors that we really do also encourage you to look at. Remember, when you're choosing a design, reading the seminal works is essential. Reading secondary resources like my book and others like Creswell are fine, but these are not the seminal works. So your dissertation committee will be looking at your critical overview of the seminal authors and how you present their literature to substantiate your choice of research design. So just before we get to the questions, and I know that we're going to have about 15 minutes for questions and answers, Dr. Boberg and I will be presenting the second part of this series next week at the same time, next Wednesday, the 22nd. And in that webinar, we're going to be looking at and delving into ethnography, narrative inquiry, and grounded theory, which are the 3 other major qualitative research designs in addition to case study and phenomenology. And we greatly welcome anybody in this webinar to attend next week as well. Even for those of you who may be doing case study or phenomenology, it's a really good idea to get a basic and really deep understanding of all the different research designs so that you can make the appropriate choice for your own study. So that said, we are now going to open up to questions, and I'm going to ask Emily to read out some of the questions. I know there have been almost 100 questions posted in the chat so far, and we're not going to be able to get to all of them. So I'm going to ask Emily to field some of the questions. Some of the questions that are specific to any of the students on this call's own study would be best addressed with your own chair and your doctoral committee, including your subject matter expert. But we're going to be answering today some of the more general questions, and so we greatly welcome them. So Emily, please let us know what's out there.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you all. We have compiled a list of the questions, and we have put them in chronological order. So if at any point we don't get to through all of the questions today, which is possible, let's continue that conversation in the comments.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. So the very first question applicable, you mentioned that qualitative is not problem solving. How would you relate that to the difference between a PhD in business and the problem solving nature of a DBA? So I think the question has to do with the theoretical versus applied.
Yeah.
And
yeah, in a PhD, the focus is on theory, whereas in an EDD or a DBA, the focus is on practical application and it's a more practitioner-based approach. But either way, case study is focused on exploration and discovery. Phenomenology is focused on exploring the deep essence of a lived experience. So either way, whether it's a PhD or an EDD or a DBA, the research design would remain the same.
Okay, Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg. And the next question I have, Dr. Boberg, would you be able to share the title of the study that was in relation to the school fire? I don't know if the title of the study was discussed. Forgive me if I missed that detail.
It's an exploratory case study of the self-reported motivations of students who set school fires.
Okay. Was that in the reference section at all? So maybe the
No,
student can look to it?
it's actually one of the examples that Dr. Bloomberg spoke about with the dissertation examples. It's actually my dissertation.
Oh, okay, wonderful. So we can find that on ProQuest. Great.
You can.
Yes, and it's all listed, Emily. These studies are these specific dissertations that we selected are listed with the URLs, which will take a student or a person directly to the ProQuest publication.
Thank you so much. Okay, great. Moving on down here. And Jenna, just a heads up, I haven't been able to compile any of the other questions that are in our chat, just so you are aware.
Okay.
So in comparing designs, after we have selected a case study for a topic like teacher perceptions, what would be another suitable design for researching teacher perceptions?
Well, okay, I'll take that. And I'm also going to ask Dr. Boberg to weigh in on it. But my immediate answer to that would be, if a student or a researcher feels that a case study is an appropriate research design, it is highly recommended that you look at the other designs as well to see whether any of the others could be more suitable. And you'll only know that once you read up on the other designs and then look at those design features in relation to your study's problem and purpose and research questions. So you may come back to the understanding the case study is the most appropriate, but you should also be able to justify why case study and why not the others. And that is very much part of an exemplary dissertation as well. It's not just, well, I've chosen case study, but also I've looked at other designs and I have determined that case study is the most suitable and that phenomenology or ethnography may not be suitable, and give the appropriate reasons why not. Dr. Boberg, would you like to add to that?
No, I absolutely agree. Normally, the first thing I think of when somebody is saying that they're going to look at teachers' perceptions of something, I normally think right away, most likely that would be a case study, because it would be a bounded system of teachers in a specific course, class, and that would be kind of the bounded system. So when you say perceptions, that's the first thing I think of. When you say lived experiences, the first thing I think of is a phenomenology. But just as Dr. Bloomberg said, look at all the 5 common qualitative research designs, read extensively on each, and then you're going to have to justify which design you actually choose.
Right. And I'd like to just also add to that, and thank you, Dr. Boberg, for that. I agree with everything you say there. This question also leads into the idea of specific rather than generic. And we're going to be talking more about that next week once we've covered all 5 of these major research designs, because there should be there are very few situations, and I actually have not come across any myself, where one of the 5 designs is not appropriate. These designs are so different and distinct that among the 5, there is a lot to choose from, that most qualitative problems or research problems there would be a very hard time not to find one that is appropriate. So I highly urge all students to really do that research and that reading and look into the literature, and you will see that one of the research designs will be a suitable match for your study, and you'll then have a solid system and a solid foundation on which to build that study. Without a specific research design, a study is not solid.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg and Dr. Boberg, for your thoughts on that piece. This is a question that we've seen a couple of times. And it has to do with the resources that go into our research. So why are, in some of our courses, some of the materials that we're learning from is not within that 5-year mark, and we're being encouraged during our research to utilize references that are 5 years or more recent. Can you talk a little bit about that as to why it's maybe different in some of our courses from the materials that we're learning versus what we're actually doing in producing our research, trying to stay within that 5-year mark? Can you speak a little bit about that?
I can take that for now, and then I'll hand it off to Dr. Bloomberg.
Great.
Well, first of all, when you look at the seminal researchers, say on the case study design or phenomenological design, you are going to find that those seminal researchers, the ones that have developed the philosophy or developed the theory, are much older. And what you will find is that using those older resources is absolutely applicable when you are justifying your research designs, etc. When we want 5 years or less, we're really looking for that piece on your topic, because when you're writing your problem statement, when you're writing your introduction, we want to see that you have found the most current research on the topic that you are writing about, because then when you read the most recent research on your topic, then that is going to share what the gaps in the current literature are. So that will be the justification for your study itself. But when you're talking about research designs, different methodologies, it is okay to use the seminal researchers of your particular design, your particular data analysis method, etc. Dr. Bloomberg, do you want to add to that?
No, you've said everything. Thank you, Dr. Boberg. And that is exactly it. It's the seminal authors, which will always be older than 5 years. And the relevance of a study and the currency of a study is based on the most current resources that you use. So for example, if you're using an outdated reference to substantiate your problem statement, somebody who's reading it is going to say, but this doesn't apply today. A lot more research has been done. So looking for the most current research, and the 5% is really like just a ballpark figure. Nobody's going to go and count up your references. But if you can make sure that everything that you're researching is current and up to date, that'll really make your study way more credible and rigorous. Thanks, Dr. Boberg.
Absolutely. And thank you both for that. That was a great explanation and a clarification on that piece. And I've seen that question a time or two before, so I appreciate that explanation. Okay, so the next question I have, can bracketing interview be for case study, not just phenomenology?
I will take that also and say yes.
Okay, great.
My study was an exploratory case study, and I attended Northern Arizona University, which is a state university in Arizona. My dissertation chair is an ethnographer, and she's an educational anthropologist, and she's a very heavy duty into ethnography. And she said that I had to go through the bracketing interview so I could be 100% transparent about my perceptions, my experiences, my preconceived ideas, and my assumptions. So we get that out there for the transparency piece that is needed and is part of trustworthiness. So absolutely, you could use a bracketing interview for other than just a phenomenological study. I just have not seen it as a practice at other universities, including North Central and now National University, but absolutely it could be used for a case study.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if one wants to do that and you're doing a research design other than phenomenology, please speak with your chair and suggest it, because there's research on it, there's literature on it, and it's a really great way to set yourself up as a reflective researcher and to really try and be as transparent and as possible in your study. So yes, absolutely, as Dr. Boberg said, it can be used in other research designs as well.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for talking a little bit about that.
And that actually was a great question. Thank you to the person that asked that. That's a really important point.
Absolutely. And thanks for the explanation. I think this is a good one too, that we can probably dive into a little bit here. Can you expand a little bit more on, I'm going to say this in its entirety, and if we need to repeat something, we can. Can you expand a little bit more on what the lived experience meaning is? So can they, the participants, still be living the experience now, or for an indefinite time frame? Is the experience a one-time thing? So I think I'll start with that.
Right. I'm going to hand it to Dr. Boberg, and I'll also contribute after her.
Okay, so with Dr. Campbell's study, and she looked at women in the military, officers and non-commissioned officers that were in combat arms units as soon as the rule was passed that women could be basically on the front lines. So when she did her study, some of those women were still living that experience of being, you know, one of the first women leaders in combat arms units. So it could be a one-time big experience like 9/11. It could be something that's ongoing. And, you know, as we talked when she did her research, I even shared with her, I mean, you could follow up 5 years, 10 years, do a longitudinal study and find out if things have changed for them in their lived experience as time goes on. So my understanding, and it's been my experience, that it doesn't have to be just a one-time thing. It can be an ongoing lived experience. Dr. Bloomberg?
Yep, I think you've said it all. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for explaining.
And again, that's a great question because, yeah, something to think about for sure.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have a question on the minimum number of participants. Is there a minimum number of participants for a phenomenology design or a case study?
You know, that again is a topic of, I'm not going to really want to go into that because that's about sampling and that's more specific in terms of a particular technique.
Okay.
But there's a lot written on it. There are different viewpoints on that. I mean, qualitative research in general has a purposeful sampling, which means a small sample compared to non-probability random sampling that is done in quantitative research. A study can even be done on one single person, such as an autoethnography, when one is doing an ethnography on one's own life. But generally, there's data saturation issues involved. And so I'd rather that I'm going to leave that question for now because it's highly specific. And as I say, there are different views on that.
Okay, thank you so much.
And I'd just like to add, as long as the person that's writing the dissertation uses the seminal research for their particular research design on what that sample size could be to meet saturation, and they can justify that, then it's acceptable. But as Dr. Bloomberg said, this can get really technical based on exactly what kind of study you're doing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. I know we got through, I would say about 10, maybe 10 questions in that time frame. That was rapid fire responses.
How many more are there actually, Emily?
Questions, I would say there's about 7 to 10 more questions. Okay. There's been a lot of conversation in the chat. I think Jenna and I were able to capture all of them, but I would recommend for all of our students, staff, and faculty that do have additional questions about this particular session out of the 2-part series, I would encourage you to have those conversations in the comments. We can carry on this conversation in the following days to come.
Absolutely.
I want to go ahead and
Dr. Bobo will go in there and comment and answer questions as needed.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bloomberg and Dr. Boberg. And I would like to thank all of our participants for coming today and asking great questions. We are always looking to provide options for you to be more successful in your academic journey. I'd like to thank Dr. Boberg, Dr. Bloomberg, my colleague Jenna Johnson, for helping me navigate the chat with as many folks that are on today. Again, as I mentioned, I will go ahead and send this recording to all of our registrants for this session today. I will provide the link to the part 2 session, which is next week. Same time, same place. And Dr. Bloomberg or Dr. Boberg, is there anything else that you would like to say in closing?
From me, just thank you so much, Emily, to you and the Graduate Study Support Center for your support of these research resources.
And Emily, I just want to say thank you for allowing both Dr. Bloomberg and I to have this opportunity to present this information. And thank you to everybody that attended. I hope that it met your expectations and that we answered a lot of questions.
Absolutely. And until the next time, I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.